The needle was still in the wall. Commodore Vtheron had filed 3 reports about it, 3 formal complaints submitted through the proper channels of the Conclave Inspection Bureau, each one requesting that the human delegation remove the small metal object they had driven into the plaster beside the door of Conference Room 7 on the Accord Station. It was not a weapon. Scans confirmed that. It was not a transmitter. It was not structurally significant. It was, by every measurable definition, nothing. But the humans had put it there on the first day of the treaty signing, and they had never explained why. And now, 14 months later, it was still there, and every time Vtheron walked past it, something in the deep instinctual layer of Sarathi cognition whispered that she was missing something. She stopped in the corridor. She looked at the needle. 14 months ago, the Conclave had voted 31-1 to ban all human military research. The humans had agreed. They had signed the documents. They had smiled. She had never once asked herself why they smiled. The vote had not been close. 31 member species, representing 412 systems, all in agreement. Humanity was too young, too volatile, too psychologically unstable to be permitted the development of military technology beyond Class 3 defensive installations. The incident at Kethara Station had proven that. The biological event at Meridian Outpost had confirmed it. And the thing that happened in the vault of the chorus, the thing that the Conclave's own investigators still could not fully explain, had removed any remaining hesitation. The humans had arrived at that session of the Conclave with their one representative, a woman named Dr. Elena Vasquez, who wore a gray civilian suit and carried no staff and sat very quietly while 31 species explained, in careful diplomatic language, that humanity's military ambitions were being placed under indefinite suspension. She had not argued. She had not wept. She had read the treaty language twice, asked one question: does this apply retroactively to research already underway? And when the Conclave confirmed it did not, she had nodded once and signed. Then she smiled. Not a smile of defiance, not a smile of relief, something in between that no Sarathi linguistic scholar had been able to categorize in the 14 months since. Vtheron had watched that smile on the recording 47 times. She still did not understand it. The first thing everyone got wrong about the ban was why humanity accepted it. The Conclave's official position was simple. Humans recognized superior collective authority and had chosen cooperation over conflict. The diplomatic corps considered this a triumph of institutional pressure. The military analysts at Hegemony Command called it proof that humans, despite their aggression, were ultimately rational actors who would yield to overwhelming consensus. The Vtheron, whose memory network spanned 60,000 years of galactic political history, agreed. A species that accepted limitation this quietly was a species that had been broken at the psychological level. No one considered a third option. No one asked, what if they agreed because they had already finished? The research station did not appear on any map that the Conclave had access to. This was partly because it existed inside an asteroid that had been reclassified as debris field 7 years before the ban, quietly removed from navigational charts during a routine administrative update that no single inspector had ever been assigned to verify. It was partly because the station's power signature was deliberately calibrated to match the natural electromagnetic output of the rock around it, a process that had taken 3 years of engineering refinement and produced, as a byproduct, 17 separate innovations in energy masking that humanity had never disclosed. But mostly it was because the station was staffed by 11 people, and 11 people can keep a secret in ways that 11,000 cannot. Their names were Dr. Vasquez, who visited quarterly, Commander Rin Mako, who ran daily operations and had not slept more than 4 hours consecutively in 2 years, 7 researchers, each a specialist in a domain the Conclave didn't know humanity had reached. One medic named Orsilia Fekete, who was not, technically, just a medic, and one person listed in the station manifest only as the consultant, whose real function no one on the station ever spoke aloud. They called the station the Needle. Nobody had told Vtheron that. Commander Mako was running the morning assessment when the first anomaly appeared. She was standing at the central display, coffee in a sealed travel mug. The station recycled everything, including atmosphere, and the smell of fresh coffee had become almost unbearably precious. Reviewing the latest output from Lab 3, when the proximity sensor threw a single quiet ping. She looked up. "Vasquez," she said, without raising her voice. Dr. Vasquez appeared in the doorway of the adjacent office 3 seconds later. She had been awake. "I saw it," Vasquez said. They looked at the display together. A Conclave inspection frigate, running a survey pattern that was technically routine, but that passed, for the first time in 14 months, within scanner range of their debris field. Mako said, "How long do we have?" "If they maintain current heading, 18 hours before they're close enough to notice anything anomalous, assuming their equipment is standard." "Is it standard?" Vasquez paused for exactly 2 seconds. "No." Mako turned away from the display. She picked up her coffee. She said, as though commenting on the weather, "Then we have 12. Here is what the Conclave inspection team believed they were doing. Conducting a routine survey of the debris field designated Kappa 7 remnant, as part of the annual compliance sweep mandated under Article 9 of the Military Research Prohibition Treaty. Here is what they were actually doing, without knowing it, confirming one of 3 planned test conditions that the station crew had been anticipating for over a year. This was the first misinterpretation. The frigate's commander, a meticulous hegemony officer named Third Echelon Prax, had chosen this specific survey route because the Kappa 7 remnant field was the most boring sector on his assignment list, and he had a personal policy of completing boring tasks early. He wanted it done and logged by midday so his crew could run maintenance on the secondary drive coils, which had been making an irritating harmonic noise for 6 days. He was, by every measure, not looking for anything. He found something anyway. The signature was not from the station. That was what made it so interesting and so dangerous. When the frigate's long-range scanners caught the irregular energy pattern inside the debris field, what they were actually detecting was the output of Experiment 7C, which had been running continuously for 4 months in an external array that was deliberately positioned to be found if anyone looked closely enough. Not because the researchers were careless. Because they had wanted it found. Mako watched the frigate's sensor sweeps on the station's own passive monitoring system, tracking every ping, every probe, every carefully calibrated question the Conclave ship was asking the dark. She had a notepad, actual paper, because paper left no electronic signature, and she was making marks on it. "They're focusing on the array," said Orsilia from across the room. "Of course they are. They're going to board it." "Yes." Orsilia was quiet for a moment. She was a precise woman who had trained as a surgeon before the military recruited her, and she had a surgeon's relationship with silence. She only broke it when something needed to be said, and when they analyze it. Mako made another mark on her notepad. "They'll conclude it's a ghost signature from an old mining operation, partially degraded, consistent with the reclassification date." She paused. "Mostly." "Mostly," Orsilia repeated. "There'll be one reading they can't explain, something that doesn't fit the mining hypothesis. And that will send them back to file a report, which will take 3 weeks to process, which will trigger a secondary inspection 6 months from now, assigned to a different team." Mako looked up. "By then, we'll be done." Orsilia studied her for a long moment. "How long have you been planning this specific sequence?" Mako said, "Which version?" This was the second misinterpretation, though third echelon Prax would not discover it for 11 months. When his team boarded the external array and ran their analysis, they found exactly what Mako had predicted: a ghost signature, mostly degraded. Consistent with ancient mining activity, with one anomalous reading that could not be explained by the mining hypothesis, but that also could not be definitively attributed to any prohibited military research. Prax wrote it up as an unexplained environmental artifact. He flagged it for secondary review. He filed his report. He did not, in his report, note that the array's internal structure contained a hidden secondary chamber. He did not note it because his scanners did not detect it. His scanners did not detect it because the chamber was shielded with a material that the Conclave did not know humanity had developed, using a process that did not appear in any research disclosure document, because it had been developed after the ban was signed, inside the station, by a woman named Dr. Yuna Choi, who had not slept in 31 consecutive hours when she finished it, and who had cried when it worked, which her colleagues had all quietly pretended not to see. Inside that chamber was 6 months of data. Prax flew away with his report. The data remained. 3 weeks after the inspection, Vtheron received a briefing summary. She read it at her desk on a cord station, in the office that overlooked the corridor where the needle still sat in the wall. The summary was 12 pages. Prax's conclusion was clear: no evidence of prohibited research activity in Kappa 7 remnant. Flagged anomaly classified as environmental artifact. Secondary review scheduled. She read it twice. Then she called up the original scan data, not the summary, the raw numbers, and she began to look at the anomalous reading. She looked at it for a long time. The specific frequency pattern of the reading was not consistent with mining activity. She had agreed with that from the moment she saw it. But it was also not consistent with any known human military research signature. She had checked. She had cross-referenced every known human technology profile in the Conclave database, going back 40 years. No match. Which meant either it was a genuine anomaly, as Prax concluded, or it was something the Conclave database did not contain. She sat very still at her desk. The database contained every human technology disclosure ever submitted, every patent, every research paper, every innovation filed under the Treaty of Open Knowledge that humanity had signed upon joining the Conclave. If the reading didn't match anything in the database, there were only 2 explanations. Either it was meaningless, or humans had invented something they had never told the Conclave about. She picked up her communicator. She put it down. She thought about the smile on Dr. Vasquez's face at the treaty signing 14 months ago, and she thought about the question Vasquez had asked: does this apply retroactively to research already underway? And for the first time, she thought about what already underway might have meant. Not the research they knew about. The research they didn't. She picked up her communicator again. Then she stopped. Because she had just realized something that made the first realization feel like the surface of something that went very, very deep. The Conclave's military research database did not only contain disclosures from humanity. It contained the research profiles of 32 species, and she had cross-referenced the anomalous reading against human profiles only. What if the reading was human origin, but built on a framework no one had recognized as human? What if they had been working inside a conceptual structure so different from any previous research direction that it didn't resemble human science at all? What if that was the point? She set down the communicator and opened a new search. She typed, cross-reference anomalous reading against all known theoretical frameworks, all species, all eras. She waited. The system returned a result she had not expected. Partial match. Confidence, 34%. Source classification, theoretical only, never experimentally demonstrated. Origin, Conclave Academy of Advanced Physics. Paper published 340 years ago by a Vtheron researcher named Sethal, who had proposed a method of energy propagation that all subsequent researchers had agreed was mathematically elegant and physically impossible. Vtheron stared at the screen. Mathematically elegant, physically impossible. The reading from Kappa 7 remnant was a 34% match for something that could not exist. She sat very still for a very long time. Then she stood up, walked to the corridor, and looked at the needle in the wall. For the first time, she thought, they put it here so we would see it every day, so that we would dismiss it, so that the needle would mean something small and forgettable and harmlessly eccentric. She thought, what if they put it here to tell us what they named the thing we haven't found yet? She didn't know if that was paranoia or perception. She was beginning to understand that with humans, the difference was not always clear. Inside the station, the needle things had accelerated. Mako had not written this part in any plans. She had learned through 10 years of black-budget military research in conditions that would have been classified even before the Conclave ban made them illegal, had a terminal horizon. You could see to a certain distance, and then the fog closed in, and what you did in the fog depended entirely on who you were and what you were willing to become. She was in Lab 1 now, standing over a containment array the size of a dining table, watching the field readings cycle through their stabilization sequence for the 19th time. 18 times, the field had held for between 4 and 37 seconds before destabilizing. The theoretical minimum for useful application was 90 seconds. 19 seconds in. 43. The researcher at the primary console, Dr. Adiz Obi, who had left a tenured position at the most prestigious institution on Earth and told her family she was doing climatological field work in an extremely remote location, which was technically true in the sense that space was a location, said without looking up, "We're past the record." "I can see that," Mako said. 60 seconds. "What are you doing differently?" Mako asked. "I changed the boundary conditions," Obi said. "I stopped trying to contain it symmetrically." "You stopped," Mako paused. "The entire model assumes symmetric containment." "I know." That was Sethal's original framework. 340 years of theoretical physics assumes. "I know what it assumes," Obi said. "The assumption was wrong." 78 seconds. Mako looked at the field. It looked like nothing, no light, no sound, no visible effect. A region of space inside the containment array that was, by every external measurement, completely inert. But the instruments reading its internal state were showing numbers that made her feel something in her chest that she did not entirely have language for. 89 seconds. "This is the part," Obi said quietly, "where it's been failing." They watched. 90 seconds. 91. 95. The field held. Obi let out a breath, just one. Then she was back at the console, hands moving, pulling every data stream she could capture before the stability window closed. She did not celebrate. She did not stop. Mako watched her and thought, not for the first time, the Conclave thinks we are dangerous because we fight. They have never understood that the fighting is not the dangerous part. This is the dangerous part. The sitting in the dark for years, failing and refusing to stop failing. 112 seconds. The field destabilized. The readings dropped. The containment array returned to neutral. The room was quiet. Then Obi said, "I need 4 hours to analyze the boundary data." "You have 3. "Then I'll need coffee." "You'll get coffee," Mako said. "You'll also get Orsilia because you haven't eaten in." "I'm fine." "You're always fine, Adiz, and it's never true." Mako picked up her notepad. 3 hours, then you brief me." She walked back to the central room. She thought 112 seconds. She thought, we have 10 weeks before Vasquez comes back. She thought it's going to be enough. She had no rational basis for that belief. That had never stopped her. The third misinterpretation was the most dangerous one, because it happened at the conclave level, not the inspection level, and it shaped policy in ways that would not become visible for months. Vtheron had submitted her analysis of the Kappa 7 remnant reading to the Office of Treaty Compliance under a Priority 2 flag significant concern, but not emergency. This was itself an error, though not one she recognized at the time. She had flagged it Priority 2 because she did not yet have enough evidence to justify Priority 1. And filing Priority 1 without sufficient evidence in the current political climate, with 3 member species already accusing the conclave of using treaty compliance as a pretext for human suppression, would have been career-ending. So Priority 2, which meant it went to a review committee, and the review committee had a queue, and the queue was 16 weeks long. When the review committee finally read her analysis, they concluded the following. Commodore Vtheron was a thorough and conscientious officer whose concern was technically justified but whose conclusion, that the anomalous reading might represent an entirely novel human technological framework, was categorically not supported by the 34% confidence match. A 34% match was not a match. It was a coincidence. It was filed and archived. They did not speak to her. They did not request additional information. They did not ask why a 340-year-old theoretical paper, describing something physically impossible, was even a partial match for a reading emerging from a debris field with no registered occupants. Vtheron learned her report had been archived from a routine notification in her inbox. She read the notification once. She forwarded it to her personal archive. She did not respond. She opened a new document and began writing a request for direct investigation authority, which required sign-off from 3 senior officers, which required meetings, which required convincing people who had already decided she was wrong. She thought, they are moving faster than the committee. She thought, I don't know how fast they are moving. She thought, I don't even know what they are moving toward. She was right on all 3 counts. 8 weeks later, the breakthrough happened, and like most genuine breakthroughs, it was not what anyone had planned. Obi's boundary modification had worked. The field was stable at 90+ seconds. The team had run 340 successful experiments in 8 weeks, progressively extending both duration and intensity, and the data that was accumulating in the hidden chamber, the one Praxis scanner had not found, was enough to rewrite the theoretical physics of energy propagation in ways that would have taken the conclave's best institutions 50 years. But that was not the breakthrough. The breakthrough was what Orsilia found. She had not been supposed to find it. She had been doing routine metabolic monitoring on the research team, keeping track of sleep debt, caloric intake, cortisol levels, the grinding physical cost of 2 years of secret extreme pressure research, and she had been running a parallel analysis of the field's biological interaction data. Not because anyone had asked her to, because she was Orsilia and Orsilia noticed things. She knocked on Mako's door at 3 in the morning. Come in, Mako said, because she was awake. Orsilia came in. She had a tablet. She turned it around and showed it to Mako. Mako looked at the data for a long time. Is this accurate? Mako asked. I've verified it 4 times. The field, Mako stopped. The field is interacting with biological tissue. Not interacting, Orsilia said. More specific than that, she tapped the tablet. It's differentiating. It responds differently to different tissue types. It responds differently at different, she paused, and for the first time Mako heard something under her clinical precision, something raw and careful and afraid, at different states of biological stress. The room was very quiet. What does that mean? Mako asked, and her voice was even. It means the field can tell the difference, Orsilia said, between a living organism under stress and one that isn't, between acute trauma and baseline, Between, she stopped again. I need you to understand I am not certain about the upper limit of this differentiation capacity. The data I have only covers the range we've accidentally exposed ourselves to in the course of normal lab operation. But you have a hypothesis about the upper limit. I have a hypothesis, Orsilia said carefully, that I do not want to have. Mako looked at her. Say it anyway. Orsilia said it. The silence afterward was the longest one Mako had experienced in 2 years on the station. Then Mako said, Does Vasquez know? No one knows, just you. We need to run controlled tests. I know. That means. I know what it means, Orsilia said, and her jaw was set in a way that Mako recognized as the face of someone who had already decided. I've already thought about it. I'll do it. Orsilia. I'm the medic. I understand the risk profile better than anyone here. I can monitor my own responses in real time. I can document everything. And she paused. I need to know if this is what I think it is, because if it is, it changes everything. She was not wrong. And in the morning she would be right, and everything would change, and Mako would have to call Vasquez, and the conversation would be 17 minutes long, and at the end of it, Vasquez would say nothing for a full 30 seconds, and when she spoke again her voice would be different. Not frightened. The other thing, the fourth misinterpretation, was the one that nearly ended everything. The secondary inspection team arrived 5 months after Prax's visit, assigned, exactly as Mako had predicted, to investigate the flagged anomaly. Unlike Prax, this team was not running a routine sweep. They had been specifically briefed on Vtheron's analysis, which someone in the Office of Treaty Compliance had finally thought to include in their mission file despite the archiving of the report itself. Their commander was a Sarathi named First Echelon Kas, who had spent 11 years in the Conclave's investigative corps, and who had a reputation for finding things that were not supposed to be found. She found the outer shell of the station. Not the station itself. The rock remained convincing. The power signature held but a trace in the debris field's gravitational profile that was 7 parts per million denser than it should have been for its catalogued mass. 7 parts per million. A discrepancy so small that it had not appeared in any previous survey, because no previous survey had used the specific harmonic resonance methodology that Kas employed, because that methodology had only been formally adopted by the Conclave's investigative corps 4 months ago. As a result of, and here the recursion was almost beautiful, Prax's unexplained anomaly report, which had prompted a general upgrade of detection equipment across the fleet. Kas did not know that the anomaly her predecessor had found was a deliberate decoy. She did not know that the gravitational trace she had found was an accidental genuine signature. She thought it was the reverse. She documented the gravitational trace as likely environmental and flagged the decoy array as the primary subject of her investigation. She boarded the array again. She ran deeper scans. She found this time the hidden chamber. The chamber was empty. 6 months of data gone. Kas filed a report, evidence of prior illegal modification to array structure, no active research, no personnel, recommended status, closed with notation of historical violation. She was almost completely wrong about everything, and she had done her job almost perfectly. The data was not gone. It had been copied to 4 separate locations, 3 of which were inside the asteroid, inside a system whose architecture was based on a principle that had not yet been formally described in any conclave scientific framework, and which therefore could not be searched for. The 4th location was in a biological storage medium that had been developed by Orsilia in the 8 weeks since the breakthrough, and which she carried with her at all times, and which was, to conclave scanners, indistinguishable from a human body. Because it was a human body. Because it was her. Because when she had run the controlled tests, she had discovered that Omsethal's impossible field could, under precisely the right conditions, encode information into living neural tissue without altering function. Not metaphorically, not as a description of memory. Literally encode, the way you encode data onto a medium, reversibly, retrievably, with a fidelity that exceeded any physical storage technology the Conclave had yet developed. Orsilia Fekete was carrying 6 months of the most significant scientific research in 3 centuries inside her own nervous system. She had volunteered. She had not told Mako until after it was done. The conversation that followed was the angriest Mako had been in 2 years. It was also, she realized afterward, the most frightened she had been, not because the data might be lost, because Orsilia was her friend and Orsilia had turned herself into a medium. And Mako was not certain what that meant for either of them, long-term, and the uncertainty was the kind that lived in the body, not the mind. "You should have told me," Mako said. "You would have said no. That's why you should have told me." Orsilia looked at her with the steady calm that was either courage or something adjacent to it. "Would you have done it yourself?" Mako said nothing. "Then it had to be me," Orsilia said, "and it worked and I'm fine." "You don't know that." "No," Orsilia said, "but neither do you, and we have work to do." They had 6 weeks. Not because of any inspection deadline. Because of what Obi had found in the boundary data from the final stabilization tests, the thing that even she had not anticipated, the implication buried in the third-order differential of the field's propagation curve that she had almost missed because it appeared in a range no one had thought to examine, because no one had thought anything interesting could happen there. Obi brought it to Mako at 11 in the morning on a Tuesday, and she did not knock, and she did not apologize for interrupting, and she said, without preamble, "I know what the field does at scale." Mako put down her coffee. "Tell me." "At the scale of the experiments we've run, it's a stable, controllable energy propagation phenomenon with biological differentiation capability." Obi set her tablet on the desk. The screen showed a graph that climbed in a curve that started gradual and ended nearly vertical. At the scale of, say, a regional conflict, a battle space covering 200 cubic kilometers. She waited. "Go on," Mako said very quietly. "At that scale," Obi said, "the biological differentiation capacity means that the field doesn't just differentiate between tissue types. It differentiates between combatant states, between lethal intent and non-lethal presence, between active harm and defensive positioning." She paused. "Rin, do you understand what I'm saying?" Mako understood. The field scaled up could tell the difference between a weapon being used and a weapon being carried, between someone trying to kill and someone trying to survive. It was not a weapon. It had never been a weapon. It was something the Conclave's entire military framework had no category for, because the Conclave's military framework, like the military frameworks of every other spacefaring civilization in recorded history, assumed that the distinction between combatant and non-combatant was a moral judgment enforced by rules of engagement. This made it a technological judgment, enforced by physics. The implications cascaded outward from that point in ways that Mako could feel rather than calculate, each one landing with the weight of something she would need months to fully process. A technology that could, at scale, make indiscriminate weapons selectively inert. A technology that rendered mass casualty scenarios physically impossible in the field's presence. A technology that didn't require any combatant to choose restraint, because restraint became the only available state. A technology that made war not illegal, not immoral, not forbidden by treaty. Impossible. Mako sat still for a very long time. "How long have you known?" she said finally. 4 days. "And you waited." "I needed to verify it. I needed to be certain enough to say it." Obi sat down across from her. "I'm certain enough." Mako picked up her communicator. Vasquez answered on the second tone. Mako said, "You need to come early." A pause. Vasquez said, "How early?" Now Mako said, "Yesterday, the day we signed the treaty." Another pause longer. Then, "How bad is it?" "It's not bad," Mako said. "It's Ellie, it's the other thing." She heard Vasquez breathe in. Then Vasquez said, very quietly, "Oh." Just that one syllable. But Mako had known her long enough to hear inside it the weight of everything they had spent 2 years building toward, and the fear, and the thing that lived on the far side of the fear, not triumph, because triumph was too simple, too clean. Recognition. Vtheron was walking past the needle when her communicator sounded. She stopped. She looked at the small piece of metal in the wall while she answered. The message was flagged Priority 1, which meant it had bypassed the queue entirely, which meant someone had finally convinced 3 senior officers to sign off, which meant her formal investigation request had been approved. She had a team. She had authority. She had 6 weeks before the next planned inspection window. She looked at the needle. She thought about the question Vasquez had asked at the signing. Does this apply retroactively to research already underway? She thought about what already underway meant if you assumed that the humans had not been asking about the research the Conclave knew about. If you assumed they had been asking about something they had been building for years before anyone thought to look. If you assumed that the question was not a clarification but a courtesy. A small, quiet, professional signal. We know you're going to find something. We want you to know that you were never ahead of us. She reached out and touched the needle. It was cold, plain metal, nothing embedded, nothing encoded, nothing hidden in it. She knew because she had tested it twice with every scanner available to her. It was just a needle. And for the first time she thought, that's the point. It doesn't have to be anything. It just has to be there. It just has to make you look. It just has to make you think, every single day, in the building where you enforce the rules, that you are missing something. She thought about 31 civilizations, 60,000 years of galactic history, every war and treaty and alliance and collapse catalogued in the Conclave's records. And she thought about a species that had been sapient for a geological eye blink, that had reached the stars with chemical rockets, that had been told they were too dangerous and too young and too volatile, and that had responded by quietly, patiently, in secret, in the dark, in a station they named after the thing they put in the wall. By developing the one technology in the universe that made their reputation irrelevant. Not a better weapon. The end of weapons. She thought they didn't do this because they had to. She thought they did this because someone told them they were the dangerous ones. She stood in the corridor for a long time. When Vasquez arrived at a court station 3 days later, Vtheron was waiting at the docking bay. No investigative team, no formal record of the meeting. Just her. Vasquez stepped off the shuttle, gray civilian suit, no staff. She looked at Vtheron for a moment and then she said, "You want to know why we signed?" "I want to know why you smiled," Vtheron said. Vasquez was quiet for a moment. "Because we were almost done," she said. "And because," she paused and looked around the docking bay at the 32 flags of 32 species hanging in the pressurized air, "because I knew that when we were done, we wouldn't need to fight about any of it. The question of whether humans should be trusted with military capability." She looked back at Vtheron. The answer was going to be no. Not because the answer was wrong, because the question was going to become the wrong question. Vtheron thought about that. "What's the right question?" she asked. "Whether you're willing to let us share it," Vasquez said simply. "Whether the Conclave wants a galaxy where war is physically constrained by a field that doesn't know ideology or politics or fear. Whether 31 species who have spent 60,000 years building rules about how to fight are ready to live somewhere you can't." She let that sit in the air between them. "That's a harder question. We've been asking ourselves for 2 years. What's the answer?" "I don't know," Vasquez said, and she smiled, not the smile from the treaty signing, not the opaque, classified thing that Vtheron had spent 14 months studying. Something simpler, something tired. "That's the part we can't do alone." There is a recording in the Conclave's archive, logged 3 months after that conversation, of the formal session at which Dr. Elena Vasquez presented the Needle Project to the full assembly of 32 member species. It runs for 4 hours and 11 minutes. The technical presentation alone takes 90 minutes. The subsequent questions take 2.5 hours. But what the recording captures that the transcript does not is the silence. Not between questions, not between speakers. At the moment, 43 minutes into the presentation, when the assembly understood what they were looking at, when the implications finished cascading through the room, through the simultaneous translation systems, through 60,000 years of accumulated assumptions about the nature of conflict, through every war ever catalogued, every treaty ever signed. 43 minutes in. A silence that lasted 11 seconds. 11 seconds is a very long time for a room with 200 beings in it. Third Echelon Prax, who had been assigned as a technical observer because of his inspection history, later wrote in his personal log that what he felt during those 11 seconds was not triumph, and not fear, and not anger, and not relief. He wrote, "I felt as though I had been measuring the wrong things for my entire life." He wrote, "The humans signed the treaty. They were polite. They asked one question. They put a needle in a wall. And then they went somewhere we couldn't see them, and they did the thing that made all of our arguments irrelevant." He wrote, "We thought we were the ones deciding what they were allowed to be." He wrote, "They were very patient about that." Vtheron still walks past the needle every day. She has not had it removed. She has not explained to anyone why it stays. But sometimes, when she passes it on the way to her office, where she is now running the joint implementation team for the Needle Project's first large-scale field deployment, she touches it. Not as a ritual, not as a symbol. Just to remind herself, the small thing is never only the small thing. The Conclave had banned human military research to contain a dangerous species. They had been thorough and democratic and correct by every reasonable standard, and they had filed the right reports and run the right inspections and asked almost all of the right questions. And while they were doing all of that with great institutional care, 11 people in a rock no one was watching had quietly produced a technology that made the entire category of danger obsolete. Not because humans were stronger, not because they were smarter or more advanced or chosen, because they had been told to stop and they had instead decided what stopping would cost, weighed it against what they believed was possible, and concluded, without certainty, without guarantee, without any reasonable expectation of success, that the cost was worth it. This was not a military calculation. It was not rational in any framework the Conclave's analysts could entirely model. It was the thing that 60,000 years of galactic history had consistently misunderstood about humanity, had failed to account for in every projection, every threat assessment, every diplomatic posture. Not that humans refused to accept limits. That when given limits, they quietly went somewhere dark and asked themselves what was worth building anyway, and then they built it, and they stayed awake until it was done, and they cried when it worked, and they turned themselves into living libraries to keep it safe, and they waited, and they did not stop. The galaxy had been afraid of what humans would do with power. It had never thought to be afraid of what they would do without it. The needle stays in the wall. It always will.